Hello and welcome to an absolute classic Fully Charged Plus podcast. This is really what it's all about. At the end of the day, this is the sort of thing that I'm so thrilled that we are able to do. Just want to jump straight in right now, just to be different, and have a quick word from our lovely sponsors, My Energy, and just check this out. If you don't know anything about My Energy, it's worth following all the links. They'll all be in the show notes underneath or connected to this episode. But they're a remarkable company who are doing extraordinarily well with an amazing range of products, most of which I have in my house in one form or another. So I'm very involved with them. They're an amazing company. Have a listen to this.
My Energy is putting the I back into British innovation. My Energy is putting the I back into inventing the future. My Energy is putting the I back into inspiring a nation. Recharging the world with green, smart energy. Charge your EV with your PV and more. Visit myenergy.com and help to spark the green revolution. My Energy, driving the charge to a greener future.
Great stuff. Thank you so much, My Energy. We really appreciate your support, and we've been on an amazing journey in tandem. They didn't really, they don't need us anymore. But right at the beginning, when we first met them, it was an amazing meeting of minds and ideas. We are talking today about meetings of minds and ideas. This is really a kind of world that I personally knew nothing about, and the general public aren't going to be aware of. This is not a public-facing company, but I'm talking to David Krajicek from JATO Dynamics. Now, JATO Dynamics are, I would have crudely described them as a consultancy firm. So they work with the automotive industry, now very much with the charging infrastructure industry, which is emerging. People who make chargers and install chargers and the grid connections with them. Their whole business is changing because of electric vehicles. And their insights into how that market operates, believe me, are very interesting. So I got quite excited talking to David, and he's a really delightful man. He's a very easy to listen to, very good communicator. Just saying that right now because it does make a difference, and it's very important. So it is a fascinating episode. I really hope you enjoy it, and I'll see you at the end of the episode. But for now, let us welcome David Krajicek from JATO Dynamics to the Fully Charged Plus podcast. So, David, thank you very much for joining us on the Fully Charged Plus podcast. I'm not going to lie, because I've been reading about what JATO Dynamics does, and it sounds amazing, but I'm not going to pretend that I genuinely understand. So I really need you to explain the rudiments, because I know the areas that you cover, but it's outside my field of understanding. Mm-hmm. So if you can give us a brief breakdown of what JATO does.
Certainly. So we provide intelligence, insight, data, if you will, all three, right, to the automotive industry and broadly to categories that I would call adjacent to automotive categories in terms of insurance, digital marketplaces, leasing, and the like. Right. And basically, our focus is really on the specific automobiles and related elements associated with the options and features on those vehicles, the value that consumers place on those, the type of incentives and financing associated with those. So it's really in those areas that we focus. Although we've also been actively engaged, obviously, in the rise of electric vehicles and the associated new technologies there, as well as the rise of carbon tax, WLTP, right, if you will, and helping to inform the level of taxation depending on the features or elements of a car.
Right. So that's, I mean, it's pretty comprehensive, and it's also, so I'm assuming this information is of enormous interest and value to automotive manufacturers and probably now people who run car charging networks.
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of, historically, as you rightly point out, it has been insight and information of great value to the manufacturers, to the automotive manufacturers.
Yeah.
But anymore, as you consider a broader, what I like to call the mobility ecosystem, car charging, even some of the suppliers or new suppliers that are coming into this, as well as even insurance companies, as they look to understand risks relative to ADAS types of features, automated driving solutions or elements. So it's becoming a much broader cohort, if you will, of people interested, or clients or companies interested in that information.
Right. And I mean, one of the things that I'm extremely aware of in the UK, just from observation, and actually fairly recently the Netherlands, because I've been over there, is a genuinely eye-opening increase in electric vehicle ownership. I mean, I know that is happening just from the statistics I see. It's just when you see it firsthand, when you're sitting in a traffic jam and you realize more or less all the cars in it are electric. It's
interesting. You see, I can only reinforce your personal experiences. Right. By talking about the fact that you do see a rise in electric vehicle purchase, and you also see that it continues to grow across Europe, but also in places where it has been fairly robust in terms of growth. A place like China, where I would say is really leading the way in this particular sense.
Yes, no, and that's because we have a correspondent in China, and it is remarkable how many, he's flooding us with, have you heard about, and it's companies we've never heard of, and you think, well, they must be a startup and they've just done a prototype. No, they made 100,000 cars last year and sold them.
Yeah, and look, you can get in China, you can get a brand new electric vehicle for something on the order of 3,000 to 4,000 euro. To 4,000 euro, whereas in the US or in Europe, you're talking about north of 35,000. So clearly, and they've been able to get that production capability right, and really have been stimulating and driving demand.
Yeah, and I mean, do you see any kind of potential glitches? I mean, there's the obvious one at the moment, obviously, is the semiconductor chip shortage, and that's affecting industry across the board. It's not specific to, not even specific to vehicles, but very not specific to electric vehicles, just cars, a lot of stuff. But other than that, which I sort of like to think of as a hiccup rather than a major, if there's a shortage of a product, that there's going to be a company going, oh, there's a shortage of product, let's make some as quickly as we can. But I mean, are there other, I've always been wary about being overly complacent and going, oh, everybody wants electric cars, and it's very easy to sort of, if you like, emotionally inflate the figures, because I'll see a street in London full of electric cars. I go, yeah, but that's London. It's very specific.
Yeah. So there's a couple of points I would make. The first is, I do think that, going back to your observation about the chip shortage, what I find very interesting is, and you can see this throughout the industry, many of the manufacturers are becoming emboldened. It's been a fairly conservative lot, if you will, with regards to how they behaved or made decisions. But I think the chip shortage has, in some respects, accelerated some of the retooling of manufacturing and pivot to electric vehicles, right? Yeah. So I think that from a market dynamics and from the impact that supply chain disruption has interestingly accelerated some of that trend. With that said, you also pointed something out that I think is very interesting, which is where you see the price points and the demand for EVs much more broadly based in the market in China. You see it much more segment related in Europe and the US. So that's where it's more in the luxury space that you see this. And it gets back to your precise point, right? It's like, well, yeah, I see a line of electric vehicles, but that's in London. And I see a certain type of vehicle catering to specific types of market segments. Yeah. So to that point, the question really becomes not what's going to be attractive on High Street, what's going to be attractive on Main Street. And what are we going to have with regards to the type of appetite and demand, right? And so this is one factor. I think the second factor is how attractive or how competitive the prices are for electric vehicles. Again, there's only, I think, Norway. If I look at Europe, for the most part, you see a price premium for electric vehicles relative to internal combustion engine vehicles. I think only in Norway is the average retail price less for an EV than it is for an ICE vehicle. But I think that's another potential hiccup point with regards to whether we'll see a continued rapid acceleration of this. And I think that for me, the third is, and you alluded to it earlier about interest from charging stations or chargers, is infrastructure. And because I don't know about you, I'll give you one anecdote that isn't based on our data, but just on my network, where I've had two people tell me that they're turning in their cars, they got stuck, and there was no charging stations around, and and they were on a lease, which made it a little bit easier, obviously, to trade in. But again, this is where I think that the economics around purchase, the infrastructure around maintenance, and ultimately the type of model segments and target segments in the market are going to all play out. And it's not a foregone conclusion, but it's certainly moving in the right direction for EV.
Yeah. And I mean, I think I have to live in the faith that because I think that is the biggest barrier now. And it's the one that and it's interesting, it's the one I hear the most about is the charging infrastructure. And it varies. I mean, it depends where you are. Having just been in the Netherlands fairly recently, it's not an issue there. They don't talk about it there because their charging infrastructure works.
Exactly.
And I know the same is the case in Norway. I mean, the problem they have is in, this is again anecdotal information, but it's fairly well documented. Like at Christmas Eve or at specific holidays or public holidays, when 50,000 people drive out of Oslo in electric cars and they all stop at the same charger. 150 miles out of Oslo, and there is a queue. That happens, but generally speaking, that is an exception. But I mean, it is. Would you have any? Because this is, I think, one of the interesting things. Because I hear so many people want an electric car and can't afford to buy a new one, but it's very understandable because they're, I couldn't afford to buy a new car until I was in my late 50s, and that's maybe I'm lazy, but but I now lease them. But I had second, third, fourth hand cars. That's what I grew up with when I was younger, and there aren't any yet, are there? But is that an area that you deal with or you focus on? The second hand market.
This is emerging. Well, a couple of points I would make. Again, go back to and I'm sure you've seen this as well. Is again, supply chain disruptions have made used cars or those coming off fleets very expensive and very valuable. Right, prices have skyrocketed there. Yeah. So I think that hiccup or minor disruption or notwithstanding, that is something we start to look at. Is what are the residual values going to be associated with these vehicles? I think the other interesting dynamic that is still developing is, if you think about the cars that we've purchased, whether they're first, second, third hand, they've all had a set of options or features because they were manufactured on the line and rolled out. Yeah. Now with electric vehicles come a lot more of the over-the-air feature capabilities, so more software-based elements. So the fact is, you could see updates even to quote unquote used
Yes. Yeah.
vehicles that are much more, or could be more attractive, more personalized to the driver. So this is a place where it's kind of the brave new world. We don't have a good context or a good track record for assessing that. So that is something we're certainly looking at.
Yeah, because I mean, it's presumably it's inevitable that there will be a lot of secondhand electric cars on the road at some time, just because there's so many new ones now. You know, it's going to happen. But I think it's probably going to be another 3 or 4 years before there's a sort of noticeable, lump of data about secondhand electric cars. It's just not going to happen.
Exactly, and even with that data, even with some of those experiences. Again, the market will continue to shape and evolve, based on that. Again, the extent to which you could make a vehicle more attractive by an over-the-air update can really potentially change how you go about marketing that in its primary sale, right? So there's a number of implications, and as you see the manufacturers moving. Their business model, this is going to be really attractive for them to understand and to better get a handle on.
Yeah, I mean, it is a fascinating transition because I'm sure this sort of thing has happened historically. But if you think back 120 years, and there were people that bred horses and built horse carriages and harnesses and horse feed, they didn't just slightly adjust the type of horse feed they did, and then they did automobiles. I mean, that was an absolute, a shift of technologies when the motor vehicle was introduced. But what we're going through now is really well-established, huge companies, which you all know more about than I do, who have a very well-established and well-founded and incredibly economically lean way of making engines and gearboxes and clutches. And then they're going, oh, we can't do that anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, the pain of that transition I've witnessed on numerous occasions. I mean, I'd love to know your insights into that.
That's a very, 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 for years they've gotten very good about really tuning and driving and eking out, efficiencies of a well-worn business model, right? And a production sensibility, and that's starting to change. Now, what's interesting is you do see, back to the point about producing cars at scale or producing electric vehicles at scale and really lowering that cost. You look at a company like VW, who one of the biggest sellers of vehicles in the world, moving to a common platform for their electric vehicles. This to me is critical, right? Because the extent to which you can start, at the end of the day, whether it's a combustion engine vehicle or it's a computer on wheels, you still got to manufacture it, right?
Yes.
You still have to put it together and get it out on the street. So I think that's where, taking at least some of the knowledge that you've had about that manufacturing at scale and start thinking about it from a new component sensibility, new equipment, but still needing to think about efficiencies and capabilities. And I think that's where it's really interesting. You also see companies that have taken a little bit longer to get there because they've been the pioneers. Take Tesla, right? Tesla is really starting to get on top of their manufacturing challenges, such that from two of their specific production lines, they're going to cover basically 86% of their, almost 90% of their production target for the year. So they've really started to create that efficiencies. And again, to your point, for me, the biggest challenge is how much, one of the things that they teach us in business school, right, is that it's awfully hard to do many things well, right? Strategy is about what you are not going to do as much as it is what you are going to do, right? And so for me, what is interesting to see developing is how you cohabitate your activities around your traditional ICE related vehicles and your EV strategy. And this is something that each company is taking a slightly different tact on, but that's a challenge.
Yeah. And then in terms of sales of cars, because that's one of the things I've been becoming more aware of as the years pass, is that, there was a time, I think probably 8 years ago, that I did a couple of talks at dealership conferences. Now, I do talks at all sorts of events, but I didn't even know dealership conferences happened, because they're very they're an internal event. They're not a public event.
Right.
And it was remarkable, a real learning experience for me. So that was that model of a manufacturer here and then completely independent dealerships, but which have the name of the company in huge letters above their showroom. Mm-hmm. So I always assumed that was all one company, but it isn't. And that's, I'm sure, it's been a perfectly amicable relationship until electric cars came up. And in one experience I had, which was where the company, they got me along to try and encourage some of the dealers to try selling electric cars. And there was such a stark example. There was a showroom in Scotland where the man drove one of their electric models himself, loved them, had them at the forefront of the showroom, trained his team to say, have you thought about electric? Blah, blah, blah. He sold, I think in a year, over 800 models. And there was another guy in the south of England who thought they were stupid, that diesel was better, and he hadn't sold any, and he wouldn't even allow them to put one in his showroom. And those were the two extremes. It was mostly in the middle of that. But that challenge, that's why the point I'm trying to make was a bit rather long-winded, is that it's not just the technology. I mean, I think this is what's interested me about electric vehicles. It's not just the fact, it's because essentially, you look at it, it's a car. It takes up a lot of space in the city. It's parked on the street most of the time. There's a lot of the disadvantages of cars are embodied in that. But there are some fundamental changes in the whole business structure. I mean, that's why I was interested to talk to you, because it's the way the business is being, how you sell a car is changing.
It is. I mean, it's not, and to your point, it's not just a move to an agency model, right? It's really also about the fact that you're seeing a lot more digital engagement around the pre-buying activity. The consumer journeys now are much more complex because there's more choice, right? There are more opportunities and more capabilities to review, to configure, to even buy without ever stepping into a dealership. Or, as I was talking about in terms of complexity, being able to narrow down to a few and then go in and expect that the preferences that you've maybe put into a specific manufacturer's website to do your research is going to be made available or will be known as you walk into this. So you don't waste time. Well, no, wait a minute. I was looking at, 4x4 trucks. I wasn't looking at sedans. Why you want to show me a sedan, right? So these are the type of, I think, to your point, along with the digital transformation and the electric vehicle transformation we're seeing on the production side, on the marketing, and it also changes. The other thing that I think is very interesting is as the longevity or the life cycle or lifespan of those vehicles changes, the way that people acquire or procure a vehicle or a mobility solution starts to change. You start to see the subscription models that are out there, the Polestars of the world, right? Is one example. It's just really interesting to see that type of sensibility, which also starts to change the shopping behavior because it also changes the financials, and the economic decisions that you make. So it really, to your point, it starts to revolutionize and evolve the entire ecosystem. From consideration to purchase and to use.
Because that was certainly one of where I could see the model very early on, that the model that we're used to. So the car dealership / maintenance workshop, that those two businesses fitted together very well. You know, you buy your car from that, and you know the people, and you develop. I mean, I had that experience with a really good Volkswagen garage near me. I bought a VW Golf, and every 6 months I'd take it in, and they do it really well. Quite an expensive service, usually with some fairly expensive components replaced.
Right.
It wasn't cheap, but I kind of trusted them because they did a really good job. They know the car. They, whenever it came out, it was spotlessly clean and it all worked and it was fine. So I understand that model has changed. I mean, I've had a Nissan Leaf, and I'm bad to do this, but it still works. I've had a Nissan Leaf for 11 years. It's had 2 services in garages in that time. Wow. Now it has had tests, because we have a safety test every year, the MOT in the UK. Yeah. It's had that. It's had brake pads replaced. It's had a rear wiper replaced. It had tyres replaced. But that is all. Nothing has gone wrong with that car. My daughter currently drives it all the time. And I just think that is, if something, because I would feel bad if the transmission had seized up because I haven't had it properly, but it's fine. And I've said to them, does the transmission need it? And they went, not yet, not for another 100,000 miles. So that model is so different. I mean, and I should have taken that car in. It wasn't, I just got used to not doing it. That was the thing.
Yeah, but to your point, you start to see the practical implications of that going forward, right?
And it affects the business. I mean, it affects a company that relies on servicing cars. I mean, that's
exactly right. So I think that again, what you'll see is that pivot to other dimensions that will really drive a decision for consumers going forward. Yeah. And that, again, it's going to be more about, it won't be about the specific features, especially when you can select the features and that you want, even over the air, over time.
Yeah.
So it's interesting, and I would say a market that continues to be a bit in flux as we see how some of these forces play out in terms of impacting decision. Because again, your first question, or one of your first questions that I thought was a good one, is, we seem to be going down this road with regards to EVs, but where are the hiccup points, or where are the inflections? And again, there will be those going forward.
Well, I mean, it is in that sense. It is. I was discussing this with some people earlier today, that there are some parallels with the kind of digital revolution. And that if you go back 10 years, the web was this incredibly creative and place full of humanity, which was allowing anyone to express themselves. What we didn't see coming was, some of those people are expressing themselves slightly unpleasant.
Exactly.
Which is, they're right to do it and all the rest of it. But, we're now very aware of the sort of darker sides of that. What, in a sense, from, I'm of a generation that was aware of that, a kind of hippie attitude to, all data is free and it's all beautiful and everyone can be online and all knowledge is free and it's all that. Yeah, but and those are the sides of the changes that we're seeing with electric vehicles. I am yet to see, seriously negative things, other than, one of my arguments is, if we replace all the combustion vehicles we have now with electric vehicles, the same number, we're still going to have pictures of 7-lane highways in Los Angeles that are blocked up. It's kind of
But take it from someone who grew up in Los Angeles. I can attest to the fact that you put one space filler with another one. It doesn't matter what it runs on; it's still going to be in that space.
Still going to be in that space. I mean, it is I have lived there long enough to experience, the baffling thing of, I'm sitting in a car with one other person, and I'm surrounded by tens of thousands, but especially on some of the hills when you're going down a big hill and you see this. I mean, it's moving at sort of 4 miles an hour, but and it's like huge. We can't imagine it in this country how big that is. Yeah. But that's what the point I wanted to make about that is, some of the things I'm seeing emerge now that have been around for a long time but have not quite worked or started well and faded. But I'm just starting to see some car sharing projects in cities. The one we saw recently was in Utrecht in the Netherlands, where we interviewed a couple of people who use it, who used to have private cars. So they're well-educated, wealthy people. They live in Utrecht. They don't want a private car. It's the system of this car sharing, they say, is better. That's why they're not doing it to be green or to be ethical or anything. They're doing it because it's a better experience for them to have a choice of cars all really near where they live. They don't have to kind of get on a bike and cycle to the other side of town. Mm-hmm. They're all electric. They all have their own parking space with a charger that is bi-directional. I mean, they're like 10 years in advance. But I don't know, because I've talked to a couple of big OEMs about how car sharing will affect it. And they seem very positive about it. They weren't being negative, because obviously it affects their sales. I mean, is it a topic you discuss with your clients?
Yeah, I think for the most part, this is a well, I don't know if it's a concern as much as it is a trend that they're watching, right? Because I think that the reality is, to your point, if I'm in a car sharing arrangement, I'm unlikely to purchase or even a vehicle or get a subscription. So I do think it is something that they want to understand, want to track. Not necessarily worried about it at this point. It's just a matter of, because it's not caught on, and if anything, there's been a bit of a walk back from that as people want kind of a personal space in the kind of a pandemic environment.
Well, yes. I mean, yes. In March 2020, I was thinking, I don't want to share my car with anyone.
Yeah. The one thing that I do find very interesting is there's one avenue that the manufacturers are starting to think about and will really need to, I think, or those that figure it out will be truly successful. And that is building an experiential brand, right? Within these new vehicles, right? Because you're going to be able to, as we talked about before, really tailor specific features or tailor the environment or the interfaces to your own thinking and needs. And I think that there we do have certain lifestyle features necessarily associated with certain brands in the market, but I'm talking much more about an experience within the vehicle space, right? That continues to define what that brand is and what it stands for. I wouldn't underestimate that type of effort or activity, especially as you look to the success or the failures of mobile devices, right? You talk about, technology, and there was the drive to miniaturization, and, Nokia could believe that anybody would want an iPhone. Well, why would those guys want iPhones? They're too big. The batteries have to charge. Well, it's because there was a different experience that was and use cases that were being played up to. So this is where I think that it'll be very interesting to see how they play that out, because I do think that'll be one of the new spaces for competition between the manufacturers as they jockey for certain types of experiences.
Yeah. Because I mean, it's in that sense, it's a good reminder of that. So I could also remember watching a presentation by someone at BlackBerry about how look, we need buttons. It's just get used to it. Everyone wants buttons, and that was like 2 days before the launch of the iPhone. You go, gosh, it was an extraordinary turnaround. And I mean, in a sense, that when I remember first seeing, it was 2007, wasn't it, the iPhone. I just couldn't envisage that there might be a thing that you do on the iPhone that meant you could listen to any book, you could listen to podcasts, you could watch the TV, you could, the stuff we do now, pay for parking, buy an airline ticket, order a car, Uber. I mean, all those things, Airbnb, all that stuff just appeared out of that. You couldn't predict that now. And in a sense, I'm starting to see that with electric vehicles. They're kind of, particularly in the sort of vehicle to grid space, particularly in commercial vehicles, which is one of the things I wanted to mention, but that, that they have a role beyond transportation. That is when people, when individual members of the public ask me about it and I explain what I understand of it, there's definitely a light goes on. They go, oh, that's good. Which is an interesting aspect. I mean, and that's in its very early stages. I'm a little bit obsessed with this because we saw the first rollout of Type 2 connectors. So not CHAdeMO or CCS, Type 2 bi-directional chargers. It was actually in Renaults and in Hyundais that they'd specially adapted to do that. So that technology can exist. And it's a very interesting change.
And to your point, it's not the I like to say it's not the gee whiz, it's the so what. You could get the tech, but what's the tech in service of? What are those specific use cases? What are those benefits? And how can you make those tangible and real for the marketplace? And as you're successful at doing that, that's going to give the cachet back to the tech and to the brand, right? And that's going to be a really important dynamic going forward.
Yeah, because that was one of the things I remember hearing a representative from Ford, from their commercial, their sort of PR end, was the commercial that Ford ran for the F-150, the electric F-150. There was all the kind of, as you'd expect in a TV commercial for a car, it's going around the dusty track, it's skidding around the corner, climbing up the steep track and all that stuff. Very glamorous shots. And then there's a shot of it driving in. I mean, you'll know this advert. Drives into the driveway of a house. Guy plugs it in, goes in the house, and there's a power cut in the city. And chung, their lights come on. And he kind of does a confident nod because he's running his house off his car. Well, and it's like 4 seconds of a 30-second commercial. And the Ford guy said, that is what sold the car. When people saw that the amount of inquiries they got about that were off the scale, that it kind of got that message. I mean, and for someone like me living in the electric vehicle bubble, I've been aware of the concept of vehicle to grid for 5-7 years. Right. But that was click. That was where the general, you can run your house off it. That was
that's exactly right. And again, think about that's a really great example. And yes, I've seen that commercial. You bring durability, reliability, and power into a whole different context. And again, it's forward momentum for that vehicle and for that brand.
Yeah. But now, I mean, do you also deal with commercial vehicle manufacturers, trucks, and particularly last mile delivery, the vans, the Amazon vans, if you like, that aspect of it, because that I see growing, if anything, faster than privately owned vehicles. It's so rapid.
We have done and do what we call light commercial vehicles.
Yes,
and we do track light commercial vehicles. And to your point. Again, as you see the growth in kind of the gig economy, you certainly see a big focus in on light commercial vehicles, right? And I think that you'll continue to see this because I do think that while Amazon has gone the way of, getting folks stood up as their own, contractor, right? As a way of kind of managing that. The realities are fleet management still becomes an important issue, especially if you're promising, delivery in certain amounts of time and you're looking for efficiencies. There has to be some, higher order management of that. So I do think that you'll continue to see developments in technology associated with that, whether that's better integration in with management tools that are at juncture points that dispatchers are helping to manage, or whether that's in self-direction back into the vehicles themselves in terms of route planning that sit almost wholly in those vehicles. I still, there are, I think, significant ROI producers for that type of tech in a very tangible way, and there are efforts to develop those.
Yeah, because that's the interesting area of the incumbents and the newcomers. The fact that the example certainly in the United States is Rivian, is a company we've had quite a lot to do with. Yeah, that they're public face was this really cool pickup truck and an SUV, and it's amazing, and there's amazing footage of it, and we know lots of people who've done test drives now, and I'm driving it very soon. And and I've stood next to one. I didn't drive it, but it's a remarkable. But they haven't made very many of those. But in the background, they're making thousands of delivery of light commercial vehicles for Amazon and
exactly right. And look, it's also the case that again, production at scale gets attention from Wall Street. Look at what happened with Tesla's price when Hertz announced the purchase of Tesla. So and again, I do think that the next generation of LCVs, especially given the bigger focus on deliveries and home deliveries, is going to make that a very interesting space. And as you can put not just electric vehicles on the road, but tech-enabled ones that are clearly fit to the purpose of that type of use case. It's really interesting. And
I think that's
is a nice car.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? I mean, and that's what, because we've interviewed and met so many, and they're amazing people, amazing skills and imagination, like startup automotive companies. But I would want to look at the history, say since 1945, of new car companies that launched. There's very, very few, if any. It's the hardest thing to. I mean, that's what really I think makes Tesla stand out more than anything else. It's not necessarily the cars; it's the fact that a company that pretty much everyone said hadn't got a hope of actually doing it is now employed. Well, they've just passed 100,000 employees, haven't they? So they're in the big league. It is extraordinary, and they've still got 2 factories they haven't even opened yet. But
exactly, and they've got. And watch out when they do, because as I mentioned before, they've already got production well sorted in the other ones that they've got. So it'd be interesting to see what happens. But I do think that the other thing that'll be interesting is how the manufacturers, any of them, the newer ones or some of the older ones, we've been talking about trucks a bit, but what we've seen in terms of new car sales has been a real demand for SUVs, particularly in Europe. So, again, as you think about expansion of electric vehicles into broader but more affordable classes, this is the place we're watching really closely. Is there a confluence of EV and SUV appetite that really starts to drive the electric vehicle purchases in a broader base of the consumer market?
No, I think you're right, because I mean there are there's a staggering amount of SUVs on there. Because I'm not a big fan, but I totally understand the appeal and the attraction of them. But what we've noticed, and that's really, I don't think it proves anything, but in terms of views, if we show if it's a ridiculously tiny Chinese city car that is, as you were saying, like 3,000 euros or something like that, that gets a lot of interest, but also a lot of criticism, as in that's about as safe as an egg box, on wheels. But if it's a fairly compact, lightweight, small electric car that has 150 miles range and is under between 15 and 20,000 pounds, that stuff gets a lot of attention, a lot of views, a lot of questions, a lot of interaction on that. Mm-hmm. And whereas now we've reached a point, definitely with our audience, so this is very specifically our audience, where that we will get the comment, not another great big heavy SUV. Why don't they make something more appealing? But I think there's also a big difference between the European and the American market on that. I mean, I'm certainly the American market. I can understand, having driven a brand new Range Rover on the freeways in Los Angeles a few years ago, and feeling I was in quite a small compact car because the other vehicles that were taking me were huge.
Yeah. So, but I do think again that the SUV trend that we even see in Europe it's an opening for some of this move into the electric vehicle space.
I mean, that's the thing, is if you're going to make an electric car that goes a long way and it's the size of an SUV, it's kind of easier. Just the packaging,
Exactly, and some of the cell features back into it, as we were talking about with Ford, becomes an interesting opportunity as well.
Yeah. So with you did mention it earlier on. I just think it's worth delving in because I think I think it's because I did a talk at an insurance conference. In the last 10 years, I used to do talks to actors or or computer companies, and now the fact that I've spoken at an insurance conference is baffling. But it was very specifically the topic I saw them discuss. I was just watching, was insuring autonomous vehicles and the complexities and challenges therein. And this was a few years ago, and I've become slightly skeptical about the rapid adoption and development of fully autonomous. Certainly driver assistance is brilliant when it works well, and I can see that being more and more popular. But the complexities of how you insure a vehicle when it doesn't have a driver. Presumably this is an area you have.
Yeah.
Dealt with.
It's a really good point. I think there's right now. What's interesting is that there are not as much activity associated with risk assessment for some of these fundamental ADAS types of features. Things like the backup cameras and elements like that. So I think part of what is happening now is just an appreciation for and looking at whether or not there are risk assessments or risk reductions that come from specific vehicle features, right? And if so, what's the degree of that, right? Because that has and can have a fairly big impact on not just premiums, but the risk that the companies take on that, magnified against their entire portfolio can be fairly significant.
Right.
I think to your point, that starts down the pathway, if you will, towards more and more autonomy as those features take on more and more of that responsibility from the driver. And then the question becomes, okay, well, what does that look like? At this point, I think that this is more of a what I would call a numbers game, assessing risk associated with features that are known features on the device. And that's where we help. And okay, if there is a risk reduction, how do we translate that into our actuarial tables or into our quotation? But very shortly they're going to have to start dealing with and grasping with more of the autonomous driving elements and features.
Yeah, I suppose if the theory of autonomous driving even becomes partly true, as in it is safer than a human driver, and therefore, we're in such early days yet. But if there was 1 million autonomous cars on the road, and you could really measure the fact, well, look, they only had 2.2% of accidents in a year, whereas the ones with humans had 23%, or whatever it is, you could then go, okay, these are safe. They are safer. They are more. The insurance will be lower because of that. It is that difficult thing that I had a ride in a fully autonomous car. It did have a driver sitting there ready to take over, but it was really good. It worked. I'm not doubting that. But I did think while that was happening, if this was my car and I paid for the insurance and I'm not touching anything, I'm in a taxi. I'm in the back seat of a taxi. So if that taxi has an accident, it's not my fault. I'm sitting in the back. I've got nothing to do. I've got nothing to do with it. And that's where it gets confusing, I guess.
Yeah. Well, and it gets to the point of what. I would say two things on that. The first is, to that point, I think you've got it right in that's the kind of assessment that the insurance company does. It's a numbers game for them with regards to the efficacy or the impact that those specific features have, and they will incentivize lower risk, just like they do. Hey, you turn on my app on your phone and you drive this speed and you go lower, you're going to get benefit for that, right? So it's that's kind of incentivization or incentivizing behavior that they would do. Yeah. What really what you just said really made me think, if it's an autonomous vehicle, what will the vehicle experience be like then?
Yeah.
And
we don't really know.
why would I buy one then?
Exactly. That's the point. Yeah. Do I
So
want? Yeah, that's the thing. Do I want to own or even lease just for me a fully autonomous vehicle? I kind of don't. I'd like to use one when I need to go somewhere in a car and I don't want to drive.
Yeah,
Which is like it's like catching a train or a bus or in a way, isn't it? It's that.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that, but again, I think this is where you'll start to see more, not fragmentation, but more focus on certain segments of the consumer market, right? Based on use cases. And this is where it relates back to what I was saying with regards to what the experiences within the vehicle are set up to serve.
Yeah.
And who are they serving it for from a consumer perspective? I think you're going to start to see additional focus in that regard from the manufacturers.
But so to round off, because it's fascinating talking to you, because you've got such a unique view of the world that as it changes. But I mean, what do you at the moment? Are you relatively optimistic of the continued growth of the electric vehicle across the board market, not just private cars, but generally speaking?
Yeah, I am. I think that, and it's the thing that there's when you can get when you can take your manufacturing sensibilities well honed and apply them to this new production development, as we talked about with VW. Yeah. I think that's a recipe for driving costs down, which will be an integral part of the successful growth of EVs. Yeah. The other thing that is part of it is subsidies, right? As incentives or subsidies wane, I think if we cut them, or if they're cut too soon, before some of the cost reductions come in, I think you'll be challenged. I think it'll make it, again, a more luxury play or a niche play as opposed to a broad-based play. As you can ramp up production and scale, so you drive costs down while reducing incentives. I think that's and that's where China got it right? They're walking back incentives now as price points have gone down. I see growth happening as again, you can bring your production and scale up and broaden the appeal.
Yeah. I mean, and do you also see the Chinese manufacturers successfully moving into the European and North American market? I mean, is that a kind of foregone conclusion that they're going to be there in one way or another?
Now it'll be interesting to see. It won't be for lack of trying. Let me say that, right? They will definitely be making a go of it in both the U.S. and in Europe. Yeah. I think that, to your point about the kind of the smaller, cheaper, or there's going to have to be a sweet spot. It won't be at that very, very low end, but I think there will be a spot to bring in affordability and convenience, but also flexibility. So if they can get that part of the equation right, they will do a lot to drive the market themselves, because they won't have to rely on those subsidies either. They'll have price points that are going to be very attractive.
Yeah. And it is interesting, the correlation between, I mean, I'm old enough to remember, like when Japanese cars first hit the market in the UK, they were sort of a joke, and they can't make cars properly. They're no good and they won't be reliable. It was all those arguments, exactly the same thing. And they were quite successful. I think we can accept this. And then it was the Koreans, all those things, and I remember being at a car show, I think it was Geneva, at least 10 years ago, if not more. And I went on I think it was the BYD stand, a Chinese brand. And I did look at those cars and go, I really don't know a lot about automotive manufacturing, the finer details, but they didn't look very good. And if you go on a stand now at a motor show where the Chinese cars are, they're as good as anything anyone makes in North America or Europe, I think. Remarkable change.
Yeah, and to your point, you just look at any of the introduction from countries that Japan, Korea. I mean, and again, that this is where if the electric vehicle offerings are not diverse enough, attractive, and affordable, the European and U.S. manufacturers are going to leave the door wide open for the likes of Chinese manufacturers to come in. Absolutely.
Let's end on that slightly chilling but optimistic note. Thank you so much, David. It's been a real joy talking to you. Thank you so much for taking the time out to talk to us. And,
well, thank you for having
me. Okay, well, that's all we've got time for. That is perfect. It was a perfect little podcast package. Just made me very happy. It all worked. The sound is really good. You know, it's all those things. The images are really good. It was just really clear, and it all made sense, and not a lot of faffing about. Because sometimes when we start recording these, you don't know this because we cut it out because it'd be boring. But there's a lot of faffing going on. There's zero faffage on this episode, so that was really good. And David was a wonderful guest. That's all I just want to say about our live shows, which you know about, I'm sure, if you're a regular listener. But if not, we're doing our big live show in Farnborough in the south of England in the end of April, last 2 days of April, first day of May at Farnborough International. It's going to be huge. I'm not going to go on about it too much, but it is vast. Everyone and everything we've ever dealt with on the Fully Charged show is going to be there. Car companies by the huge amounts. Amazing stuff about home heating, about home energy systems. Really, that has really grown hugely. Lots and lots of stuff about that. Stuff about getting a job in renewable energy and the emerging energy tech market. That's very interesting. Huge opportunities there for employment, and possibly things that go zzz and go up in the air. But I can't promise anything of that because it's still all in the works. But it was promised publicly at the last live show. Then in May, middle of May, 20th, around the 20th of May, the weekend around 20th, 21st of May, we are in Amsterdam, at the Rai in Amsterdam, for our first European mainland show, which is going, again, amazingly well. And I'll just say this, there's a lot of water in Amsterdam in the canals. And who knows, there could be things that float, quite big things that float on water that don't have diesel engines. I'm just saying that's quite a distinct possibility. That some really exciting stuff going on there. Some amazing stuff, amazing companies appearing there. Startup companies that you may have seen on Fully Charged, but you may not have seen the actual vehicles in the metal / carbon fiber. And so that's then. And then later this year in September, San Diego, California. Fully Charged Live USA, really exciting. Our second show in America. The first one was a massive success. This is looking really exciting. We'll be meeting a lot of the people involved very soon. It's going very well. So that's just a quick update. I don't want to go on about that because it's a long way away, but March 2023, Sydney, Australia. Just saying. Keep an ear out for that because that is also looking extremely exciting. End of podcast. I'm going to shut up. Please subscribe. Tell your mates. Blah de blah. Patreon. Links in the show notes. As always, if you have been, thank you for listening.